you so much, David. And now we turn to Safa.
Oh, that was quick. Thank you. I'm going to try to stick to the 12 minutes, but he generously offered me 2 minutes. So. Is it now? Yeah. Good, okay. So I'm going to talk about 3 main points. The first will be a background, and then a quick brief about violations and the remarks on accountability and reparations. There are 2 aspects to the Yemeni conflict, a local aspect or perspective and a regional and international perspective. The Yemeni conflict at its core is a local conflict that has been historically and currently usually that drives international and regional powers for the interest groups to fulfill their interests and goals. We have been talking now, like listening to the other speakers, we talk about the legal aspect of the conflict, the political aspect of the conflict, the military aspect of the conflict. But what is missing in the international narrative is the racial aspect of the conflict. The Houthis as a group is a supremacist group that believes in their divine entitlement to rule the people as descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And this entitlement grants them political, economic, social, and even intellectual privileges. So they say that usually for every conflict or struggle in communities, there is an original sin. So for example, in the US, the original sin is slavery. In South Africa, is the apartheid. In Europe, it's colonization. In the Israeli-Arab conflict, it's the occupation, and we can go on and on. And the original sin of the Yemeni conflict, as far as I'm concerned, is what I would call Hashimi supremacy, with this idea of the divine entitlement to rule the people based on the bloodline to the Prophet. So if there is one sentence to sum up the conflict in Yemen, it would be the reproduction of the history of the country before 1962. Before 1962, there were 2 Yemens, the north, under the control of the Imamate, who are Hashimis, descendants of the Prophet, and who believed in this idea. So for more than 1,000 years, they ruled the country exclusively as descendants. And then you have the south with its strategic ports and islands, and it was under the authority of international powers, mainly Britain. Aden was a British colony, and the rest was like left to the local governance. Now, 56 years forward, what you see, the repetition of the history in the north, the Houthis, who believe in the Imamate, are in control of the north, and then in the south, you see Emirates is in control of the strategic ports and islands in the south. So that was the historical background. The current background, I'm going to quickly go through 5 main stages, and at each stage, the best way for me to explain usually to my friends or professors or anyone is that at each stage there was a mistake that led to a crime. So the first stage is the 2011 revolution. Prior to the revolution, the regime of late President Ali Abdullah Saleh, he was very corrupt. He ruled the country for 33 years, leading it to be the poorest country in the region. There was 6 wars against the Houthis in the north, who had at the time legitimate grievances. Like they were oppressed as a minority, six wars. And then the south wanted to secede because the north, after the unification in 1990, Ali Abdullah Saleh considered the southern state, because it was a socialist state, they considered the lands as a booty, and then they confiscated all the lands. They dismantled the army. So later that led to calls for separation. But the main trigger, in my opinion, was Ali Abdullah Saleh's plan to make his son Ahmed his successor for the presidency, and then making Yemen a semi-monarchy. The mistake at this stage, in my opinion, was the revolutionaries' incapability to form a political party to safeguard the revolution and protect the outcomes of the revolution. What happened, the crime, if I can call it that resulted from this, was that the old interest groups and stakeholders, whether regional or local, were the ones who dictated the terms of the negotiations and enforced immunity to gave Ali Abdullah Saleh full immunity in exchange of his removal from not power, from presidency, because technically he held all power. According to this, Ali Abdullah Saleh was allowed to practice politics. He had all access to power, financial resources, the army. Then he made alliance with the Houthis, and this is the crime that resulted from the mistake of not forming a political party. The second stage is the transitional period, which started with the National Dialogue Conference mid-2013. At this stage, Yemen, believe it or not, Yemen was put at the same level with Tunisia as the two best examples of the Arab Spring countries that could come out of this revolution and bring a successful example. But what happened at this stage is while all political parties, including the Houthis and the southern separatist movement, while they were negotiating politically the future of Yemen and the social contract of Yemen and the new shape of the state, the Houthi militias in alliance with Ali Abdullah Saleh were marching militarily from the north towards the capital, while the international community, the UN and the Gulf Corporate Council, who were supervising the National Dialogue Conference, they did not consider them as a military and non-state supremacist armed group. They would continue identifying them as a political group. And one of the things that I really remembered when I was covering the news with Al Jazeera is Jamal bin Umar during the fighting in Amran. When he used to describe it, he would say, the conflict in Amran between different armed groups, and I don't know the legal of this terminology, while it was between the state and its representing military factions in Amran and a non-state military armed group. But Jamal bin Umar would say between armed groups. So this crime of neglecting what is a non-state supremacist armed group is doing on the ground, this mistake has led to the crime of the full collapse of the political process in Yemen. Because the National Dialogue Conference has ended, there were outcomes, a draft of constitution was supposed to be put to referendum, but the Houthis kept marching towards the capital, they took the government, and the political process collapsed. Then comes the Saudi-led intervention, which happened 5 months after the Houthis takeover of the capital, which indicates that Saudi Arabia, the regional powers, the international powers, did not mind the Houthis taking, or a non-state armed group taking the state, but what they minded and did not accept is them crossing the red line of Aden and reaching the strategic city of Aden. And in here I want to mention a very important interview. Anwar Ishqi, he is a former Saudi general. I think 1 month after the intervention, he was in a TV interview, and he said the Houthis promised the United States to counter terrorism, mainly Al-Qaeda. And they promised one of the coalition countries to fight. He was referring to Emirates and fighting the Muslim Brotherhood, because Emirates does not like the Muslim Brotherhood. They have a strong political opposition against them. And they promised Saudi Arabia to give up their coordination with Iran, and they will coordinate with Saudi Arabia. But he continues saying, the Houthis fooled everyone. And they took the money, they did not comply. And this means, again, that what the United States and the international community cares about Yemen is only countering terrorism. Other than that, the collapse of state, the security of the region, the lives of the civilians, it does not matter to them. And then Emirates, they have their own agenda, and then Saudi Arabia, all that it cares about is keeping Yemen a weak, vulnerable state, because for Yemen to succeed as a republic country with a democratic system and like built on principles of the rule of law and constitutionalism, that would pose an existential threat to the monarchy hub Yemen is set in. Now, to the violations of international law and human rights. There are violations committed by all parties, like all parties share these violations. The first one is restrictions on humanitarian access. Saudi-led coalition, I would actually prefer to call it Saudi-Emirati-led coalition because both of them are leading it, which restricts entry, and then the Houthis who restrict distribution. And then you have arbitrary detention, you have indiscriminate and disproportionate attacks on civilians. The Houthis are exclusively, allegedly committing these crimes. First one is not allegedly, it's a fact, the coup itself, which is a crime under the domestic law. And then use of child soldiers and mines, land mines and sea mines. There are estimates of hundreds of thousands of mines. There are no maps, and it's going to take Yemen like years and years to remove them and dismantle them. Now, the violations by the coalition, and here it gets tricky because it's hard to draw the line between the political and the legal. And first, the use of prohibited arms, and the second one is the divergence from, of their missions. So when the spokesman of the coalition announced the reason and the aims of and the justification for the coalition, there were 3 points. 1, to push the Houthis back. 2, to restore the legitimacy of the president. And 3, to protect the Yemeni civilians. 1, they have not, like, honestly and directly pushed the Houthis back from the territories they control. They're only interested in the cities that have geopolitical interests for their own agendas. Like the south, within 2 months, they cleaned it from the Houthis. They took Aden, Socotra, and the strategic areas. And then the last one is the protection of the civilians. Now Yemen is the worst humanitarian crisis, and this is not a byproduct of the conflict. This is actually a product as a conduct of hostility. All parties are using it to... Am I done? 1 minute? Okay. Accountability, as a person who has just graduated from Harvard Law School, one of the biggest questions that I couldn't find an answer to is how do we categorize the Yemeni conflict? Is it an IAC, which is an international armed conflict, or an IAC, an international armed conflict? On December 7th, 2017, after the Houthis fired the missiles into Saudi Arabia, the spokesman of the coalition made a statement saying that Saudi Arabia will respond under their inherent right to self-defense. Does this trigger the international armed conflict categorization of the conflict? Because if we are going to consider it as an IAC, international armed conflict, then this means that it would open the doors for us to consider Emirates as an occupying power or not. So I don't know, the categorization which then would allow us to choose what law applies to hold people accountable. And to be honest, sorry if I sound pessimistic, but I'm more scared of the solution, the potential solution, than the problem. The problem kind of keeps the conversation going. Doesn't mean that I don't want to advocate for the end of the war, but what kind of political settlement will we have? Is it a political settlement that would transfer the de facto atrocities and authorities on the ground to de jure? Will the Houthis stay in control of the north? Will the militias founded by Emiratis in the Janub, what kind of political process? And then the end of the war does not mean the end of the conflict, because usually the connotation made usually when it comes to the Yemen conflict, if Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis withdraw from the country, the war would stop. Nope. the Saudi-led coalition's bombardment and airstrikes will end, but the Yemeni conflict will not. So we need to renegotiate openly, honestly, what are the terms of the future? Because we're talking again, I'm going to repeat again and again and again, the Houthis are supremacists. They do not believe in equal citizenry. They do not believe in equal participation. They do not believe in peaceful transition of power, because as a doctrine to them, the way to reach power is through declaring holy war. If you believe, that is their doctrine. That is actually mentioned in their manifesto published in 2012 when they said, we are the chosen race by God and we believe in the Zaydi Hadawi religio-political theory, which gives them the divine intelligence. They did not mention the constitution. They did not mention the law. They believe in their own religious laws. So what are the laws that will govern Yemen in the transitional period? What kind of transitional justice the country will have? What about the republic? So I feel like the first step to really build a transitional justice that would lead to sustainable peace is having all parties in the negotiation table, in the political negotiation table, declaring the principles of full, equal humanity between all citizens of Yemen, under principles of constitutionalism, equal citizenry, and the rule of law. Other than that, the Houthis, if they are even removed from the scene, there will be another Houthis, another family declaring, I don't know what kind of religio-political authority they want to. So for me, it's sustainable peace and justice, an end of conflict, not end of bombardment, like conflict.